The Lion's Path, a saga of Leonidas of Sparta. Chapter 1. The Agoge's Shadow. Europa Valley, Sparta, 490s BCE. The dust of the Eurotas Valley hung thick and golden in the late afternoon sun, stirred by the relentless stomp of sandals on packed earth. Within the high walls of the dromos, the running ground, the air vibrated not with bird song, but with the guttural shouts of instructors and the harsh, rhythmic breathing of boys pushed far beyond the limits ordinary children knew. Leonidas, barely 10 summers old, felt the grit grind between his teeth, the sweat stinging his eyes, blurring the figure of his paidonomos, the boy herder, whose shadow seemed to stretch endlessly across the training field. He wasn't Leonidas the prince here. He was just another Mophax, a boy in the brutal crucible of the Spartan agoge. His lineage, son of Alexandridas II, brother to the heir Cleomenes, meant nothing within these confines. Here, status was earned solely by endurance, cunning, and unwavering obedience. He stumbled, his bare foot catching on a root half buried in the track. The sting of the instructor's switch landed instantly across his shoulders, a sharp, familiar pain. "Up, Meraikion! Does the son of Alexandridas think the dust is his bed? The enemy grants no respite." The voice of Brasidas, the paidonomos, was a rasping wit-crack. Leonidas pushed himself up, swallowing the metallic taste of blood where he'd bitten his lip. He glanced sideways. His friend, Alphaeus, ran beside him, face set in a mask of grim determination, his own breath ragged. Further ahead, his elder half-brother, Dorieus, already broader and taller, moved with a powerful, almost disdainful ease. Dorieus, born to the king's first wife, possessed a fire Leonidas both admired and found intimidating. Cleomenes, the eldest and heir, was elsewhere, already stepping into the duties of a young prince beyond the agoge's immediate reach. Leonidas's own mother, the king's second wife, existed only as a fleeting memory of warmth, long replaced by the austere rhythms of communal life. Life in the agoge was a relentless stripping away. Softness was scourged by hunger, cold, and exhaustion. Comfort was a forgotten concept. They slept on reed pallets in crowded barracks, stealing what scraps they could from the communal syssitia meals, learning the art of survival through theft, punished severely only if caught. Lessons were harsh, mastering the complex rhythms of the Pyrrhic war dance that taught coordination under duress. Endless drills with heavy wooden shields and blunt spears that built muscle and bone-deep discipline. Wrestling in the mud pits of the palastra, where submission was unthinkable and mercy unknown. One frigid winter night, the ephors, Sparta's powerful overseers, decreed a test. The boys, shivering in their thin chitones, were taken to the banks of the icy Eurotas. "The river cleanses weakness," Brasidas bellowed. "Plunge, submerge, emerge Spartan." One by one, teeth chattering, skin turning blue, the boys forced themselves into the numbing water. Leonidas felt the cold seize his lungs, a physical blow. He locked eyes with Alphaeus beside him, saw the terror, but also the defiance. Endure, he willed silently, pushing himself under the dark rushing water. Endure or cease to be. Emerging gasping, the wind felt like knives, but the approving grunt from Brasidas was a flicker of warmth. He had passed. He existed. The lessons weren't solely physical. In the dimly lit lescae, the meeting hall for older boys, grizzled veterans recounted tales of Messenian revolts crushed, of Argive armies shattered.
They spoke not of glory, but of duty, the unbreakable link between the individual and Sparta. "Your life is not your own," an old scarred captain named Theron would intone, his voice like stones grinding. "It belongs to the polis. To die for her is to live forever. To fail her is to be erased." Leonidas listened, absorbing the weight of this covenant. He saw the flicker of fear in some boys' eyes, the cold acceptance in others like Dorieus. He felt it settle in his own chest, a heavy, undeniable truth. He witnessed the harsher realities, too. The Crypteia, the secret police formed from the most promising youths, operated in the shadows. Their grim task to control the ever-restive Helot population, Sparta's enslaved underclass. Leonidas saw boys return from their nocturnal missions, faces closed, eyes haunted, carrying a grim silence that spoke volumes. He understood the necessity. The Helots outnumbered Spartans 10-1, a constant, simmering threat. But the ruthlessness chilled him. Was this the price of order, the cost of the Spartan way? One day, during a brutal wrestling bout, Leonidas faced a larger, older boy named Lycurgus. Fueled by frustration and perhaps resentment toward the prince, Lycurgus fought dirty, gouging, biting. Leonidas tasted blood again, felt his vision blur. He was pinned, the rough dirt grinding into his cheek, Lycurgus's knee pressing cruelly into his back. Surrender hovered on his lips. Then Theron's words echoed. "To fail is to be erased." Not just him, but his lineage. With a surge of desperate strength, fueled by sheer terror of dishonor, Leonidas bucked, twisted, and somehow reversed the hold. He didn't win outright, but he didn't yield. He fought Lycurgus to a standstill, earning grudging respect, and more importantly, proving to himself he possessed the arete, the excellence Sparta demanded. As he approached his 12th year, leaner, harder, eyes holding a watchfulness beyond his age, Leonidas understood. The agoge wasn't just training, it was transformation. It forged the iron will, the instinctive obedience to command, the absolute prioritization of the group over the self. It was the shadow that shaped the Spartan warrior, and Leonidas was learning to walk within it, step by painful step, towards the harsh light of manhood. The boy prince was fading, the Spartan soldier was emerging, tempered in hardship, ready for the unforgiving path ahead. The shadow was long, but within it, the first flicker of a lion's spirit began to glow.
Chapter 2. The Blooded Spear. Messenia, borderlands, circa 480s BCE. Leonidas, now a young man sculpted by the agoge into the lean, hard lines of a Spartan warrior, crouched low behind a gnarled olive tree. The scent of crushed thyme and pine resin was thick in the warm Messenian air, undercut by a sharper, metallic tang, the smell of anticipation, of violence held barely in check. Beside him, Alpheus, his face grim beneath his helmet's cheek guards, adjusted his grip on his dory, the long spear. Around them, hidden in the rocky scrubland, were 20 other young Spartiates, members of his Syssition, their bronze breastplates dulled with dust, their red cloaks carefully gathered to avoid snagging. This was the Crypteia mission, their final, brutal test of manhood. Word had reached Sparta of a Helot gathering in the foothills of Mount Tegetos, whispers of stolen weapons, coded messages, the dangerous murmur of rebellion. The ephors had acted swiftly. Leonidas's unit, deemed ready for their first taste of real command and killing, was dispatched. Their orders were clear and chilling. Eliminate the potential ringleaders. Instill fear. maintain control. No prisoners, no witnesses beyond necessity. A scout, silent as a shadow, slithered back to their position. He pointed towards a narrow ravine half a stade away. Smoke, voices, 10, maybe 15, armed with hunting spears, a few swords. They seem expectant. His eyes, hard and unreadable, met Leonidas's. The unspoken question hung in the air. Command decision, young Spartan. Leonidas's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic counterpoint to the disciplined calm he projected. He was no longer just enduring punishment. He was about to dispense death. He thought of Theron's lessons, of the countless helots he'd seen toiling in the fields, their faces etched with resentment. He thought of the terrifying arithmetic of survival. Thousands of helots, hundreds of Spartans. The cold logic of the state warred with a sudden, unwelcome pang of empathy. He crushed it. Duty, the polis, survival. He met the scout's gaze, then Alpheus's. His voice, when it came, was low and steady, carrying the weight of command he'd been bred to bear. Flanking maneuver. Alpheus, take 5 left, high ground. I take 5 right, through the scrub. The rest, Brasidas' son, Lysander, you hold the ravine mouth. Silent approach. Wait for my signal, the call of the hawk. Then swift, absolute. He saw the faint tightening of jaws, the hardening of eyes in the dim light. No dissent, only acceptance. They moved like ghosts. Leonidas led his small group down a steep, rocky slope, every footfall carefully placed, every rustle of brush sounding like a thunderclap in his heightened senses. He could see the flicker of firelight now, hear the low murmur of voices speaking Messenian, tense, excited. He saw them, helot men, mostly older, faces lined with hardship, clutching weapons that looked crude against the polished bronze of the approaching Spartans. They weren't an army, they looked like desperate men discussing a dangerous dream. The pang returned, sharper. They are slaves dreaming of freedom. He forced it down again. They are a threat to Sparta. He raised his hand, fist clenched. His men froze. He took a breath, filling his lungs, and let out a piercing, perfect imitation of a circling hawk. 2 short cries, 1 long. Instantly, chaos erupted. Spartans burst from the scrub on both sides, a terrifying wave of bronze and crimson. Alpheus's group rained down from the rocks above. The war cry, Eleu, tore through the ravine, chilling, inhuman. The helots scrambled, shock and terror replacing their fervor. Some grabbed spears, raising them in shaky defense. Others simply froze. Leonidas was in the thick of it. Time distorted. He saw a helot lunging at him with a spear. Training took over. His own dory snapped forward, a piston of polished ash and iron. It punched through the man's leather jerkin with a sickening thud. The man gasped, eyes wide with disbelief, then crumpled. Leonidas wrenched the spear free, warm blood slicking the shaft. No time for thought. He parried a wild swing from another, the clash of iron jarring his arm, and drove his shield boss into the man's face, feeling bone crunch. He moved with the lethal efficiency drilled into him for a decade. Thrust, block, shield bash, thrust again. The ravine echoed with screams, the clash of metal, the guttural shouts of Spartans. It was over quickly, brutally efficient. The helots, outnumbered, outmatched, and ambushed, stood little chance. Bodies lay sprawled on the rocky ground, blood darkening the dust. Leonidas stood panting, his spear dripping, his shield dented. The metallic smell was overwhelming now, blood, not anticipation. He looked at the man he'd killed first. The eyes were still open, staring blankly at the Messenian sky. He felt nothing. Not triumph, not remorse. A hollow coldness spread through him. A necessary act, a duty fulfilled. Alpheus approached, wiping blood from his blade on a tuft of grass. He met Leonidas's gaze, his own eyes shadowed. Clean, no survivors who saw us clearly. The message is sent. His voice was flat. Leonidas nodded. He looked around at his men. Some were checking bodies, expressionless. One young warrior, barely older than Leonidas had been when he entered the agoge, was vomiting quietly behind a rock. Leonidas understood. He walked over, placed a firm hand on the youth's shoulder. "Look at them," he commanded, his voice low but carrying. The youth flinched, wiping his mouth. "Look, remember, this is the cost of our peace. This is the edge we walk. Now compose yourself. We return to Sparta." The journey back was silent, heavy. The weight of command, Leonidas realized, wasn't just giving orders, it was bearing the consequences. He had led men into battle. He had killed. He had enforced Spartan's brutal peace. The boy who shivered in the Eurotas was gone. In his place stood a blooded Spartan warrior, his spear tested, his heart encased in the cold bronze of duty. The ravine in Messenia wasn't a battlefield of heroes, it was a slaughter pen of necessity. It was his true graduation. The path ahead seemed darker, harder, but he walked it now as a man of Sparta, his steps echoing the grim rhythm of his city's survival. The lion had tasted blood.
Chapter 3. The Weight of the Diadem. Sparta, circa 488 BCE. The news struck Sparta like a thunderbolt on a clear day. King Cleomenes was dead, not in glorious battle, but in exile, imprisoned by the ephors who had finally deemed his increasingly erratic and brutal behavior a threat to the state. Whispers spoke of madness, of self-mutilation, of a tragic, ignoble end far from the Eurotas Valley. The shock was palpable, a tremor running through the rigid structure of Spartan society. The Aegead throne, occupied by the formidable Cleomenes, who had humbled Argos and defied Persia, stood suddenly, terrifyingly empty. Leonidas, recently elevated to the status of a full Spartiate after his Crypteia mission, felt the world shift beneath his feet. He was training in the Dromos when the word came. He lowered his shield, the dust suddenly thick in his throat. Cleomenes, his half-brother, the king, dead. A complex knot of emotions tightened in his chest. Grief warred with a chilling sense of responsibility, and perhaps, buried deep, a sliver of relief that the unpredictable storm that was Cleomenes had passed, but mostly dread. He was not the heir. That path belonged to Cleomenes' young son, Pleistocus. But Pleistocus was a child, barely weaned. Sparta, facing the ever-growing shadow of Persia in the east, could not be ruled by an infant. The laws were clear. The kingship must be filled. And Leonidas, son of Anaxandridas, brother of Cleomenes, was the only adult male of the Aegead line. The diadem, heavy with history and peril, was descending upon his brow. The ceremony in the Spartan agora was austere, devoid of the pomp common in other Greek cities. The elders, the Gerousia, stood solemn. The ephors, their faces unreadable masks of authority, presided. Leonidas, clad in the simple red tunic and cloak of a Spartiate, felt the eyes of the city upon him. The hardened veterans assessing his mettle, the elders weighing his wisdom, the young warriors wondering what kind of leader he would be. He thought of Darius, his fiery half-brother, who had raged against his place as a younger son and sailed west years ago, seeking a kingdom of his own, only to meet a bloody end in Sicily. Ambition had consumed Darius. Duty now consumed Leonidas.
The senior ephor stepped forward, holding the simple bronze circlet, the Spartan crown. Leonidas, son of Anaxandridas, by the laws of Lycurgus and the will of the Gerousia, you are called to serve Sparta as her king, guardian of the Aegead throne until Pleistorchus, son of Cleomenes, comes of age. Do you accept this burden? Will you lead Sparta with courage, wisdom, and unwavering fidelity to our laws? Leonidas looked out over the sea of faces. He saw Alpheus standing straight, his expression one of fierce loyalty. He saw the wary eyes of the older nobles. He felt the immense, crushing weight of expectation. He thought of the helot in the ravine, the cold logic of survival. He thought of the Persian behemoth stirring in the east, its king Xerxes, rumored to be assembling an army of nightmares. Sparta needed strength, not flamboyance, resolve, not recklessness. He was not Cleomenes. He was Leonidas, steady, disciplined, forged in the agoge, and blooded in the shadows. He met the ephor's gaze.
I accept. His voice rang clear and firm, carrying across the silent agora. I swear by the twin gods, by the river Eurotas, and by the bones of my fathers, to serve Sparta as her king, to uphold her laws, defend her borders, and place her welfare above all else, even my own life. He bowed his head. The cool bronze of the diadem touched his brow. It felt less like a crown and more like a helmet before battle, a necessary weight for protection, a marker of imminent peril. A murmur, not of cheers, but of solemn acknowledgment rippled through the crowd. King Leonidas had ascended. Rule was not about opulence. His palace was a simple, well-built house near the temple of Artemis Orthia. His wife, Gorgo, daughter of the late Eurypontid king Cleomenes' half-brother, greeted him not with subservience, but with a fierce, intelligent gaze. She was famously wise, a true Spartan woman. What must a woman do to be a good wife? A foreign woman had once asked her. Gorgo's reply was legendary. To be a good wife, bear good children. But she was far more. She was Leonidas's confidant, her sharp mind a vital counterpoint to the blunt realities of military command. Leonidas's kingship began not with grand pronouncements, but with meticulous preparation. He spent hours with the ephors and the Gerousia, studying reports, analyzing intelligence from the east brought by Ionian refugees and Athenian spies. The scale of Xerxes' preparations was staggering. Hundreds of thousands of men, 1,000 ships, bridges of boats across the Hellespont. Persia sought not just submission, but annihilation of the Greek way of life. Sparta, the shield of Hellas, would be its primary target.
He intensified training. He drilled the army relentlessly, focusing on the phalanx's cohesion, the brutal efficiency of the hoplite charge, and the endurance needed for long marches under the hot sun. He reviewed the fortifications at the Isthmus of Corinth, the proposed Greek fallback line. He argued fiercely in the Peloponnesian League councils, dominated by his Eurypontid co-king Leodakitus, a more cautious and politically minded man. Leonidas advocated for immediate, unified action north of the Isthmus. If we cede all Greece north of the Peloponnese, he argued, his voice low but intense in the council chamber, we cede the farms that feed our armies, the cities that provide ships and men. We cede the spirit of Hellas. We must make a stand before the Isthmus, force Xerxes into a bottleneck where his numbers mean less. The debates were fierce. Many Peloponnesian allies, terrified of the Persian juggernaut, wanted to fortify the Isthmus and abandon northern Greece, including Athens. Athens, under the brilliant but sometimes volatile Themistocles, pushed for a naval strategy and a land stand far to the north. Leonidas, the soldier king, saw the strategic necessity of a delaying action on land. He needed to buy time for the Greek fleet to assemble, for the wavering cities to commit, for the walls across the isthmus to be completed. He needed a place where the Spartan phalanx, the finest infantry in the world, could nullify the Persian advantage in numbers. His gaze settled on the maps. One name kept recurring in the reports of terrain: Thermopylae, the Hot Gates, a narrow coastal pass in Melis, barely 50 paces wide in places, flanked by steep mountains in the sea. It was the key to central Greece. Hold Thermopylae, and Xerxes' massive army would be funneled into a killing ground. It was a desperate gamble, a tiny force against an ocean of enemies, but it was the only viable choke point. One evening, Gorgo found him studying a detailed sketch of the pass. "Thermopylae?" she asked quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder. He nodded, not taking his eyes off the map. "It must be held. Even for a few days, it could make all the difference." "And who will hold it, husband?" Her voice held no fear, only the stark practicality of Sparta. He finally looked up, meeting her deep, knowing eyes. "Sparta must lead. I must lead." A long silence stretched between them, filled with the unspoken understanding of sacrifice. She squeezed his shoulder. "Then come back with your shield," she said, invoking the Spartan mother's farewell, "or on it." Leonidas placed his hand over hers. The weight of the diadem felt heavier than ever, but beneath it, the resolve of the warrior, forged in the agoge and tempered in Messenia, hardened into unbreakable steel. The Lion of Sparta was preparing to roar, not in triumph, but in defiance, at the narrowest of gates. The path led north, to the Hot Gates, and destiny.
Chapter 4. The Gathering Storm. Sparta and Delphi, 481–480 BCE. The air in Sparta vibrated not just with the usual drills, but with a new, sharper urgency. King Leonidas moved through the city like a force of nature, his presence commanding immediate attention. The news from the east was dire and relentless, carried by dust-streaked messengers whose eyes held the reflection of an approaching storm. Xerxes, king of kings, had crossed the Hellespont on his bridge of boats. His army, a multi-ethnic tide of humanity and weaponry, was flooding through Thrace and Macedon, swallowing cities and kingdoms whole. The earth, it was said, trembled under their march. The sea was darkened by his fleet. Leonidas convened the Gerousia and the Ephors almost daily. The debates were no longer abstract, they were about survival. Persian heralds arrived, demanding the traditional tokens of earth and water, symbols of submission. Leonidas, in a moment of chilling defiance witnessed by the entire council, had the heralds thrown down a well. "There is your earth and water," he reportedly stated, his voice like granite. "Fetch it yourselves." It was a declaration of war, pure and simple. Sparta would fight. But fighting required allies. Leonidas worked tirelessly through the Peloponnesian League. He sent envoys, argued, cajoled, and threatened. He needed commitment, men, ships. The responses were mixed. Corinth pledged support. Tegea and Mantinea, fellow Arcadians, answered the call. But Argos, Sparta's ancient rival, nursing its wounds from Cleomenes' earlier campaigns, remained sullenly neutral. Others wavered, paralyzed by fear of the Persian numbers. The proposed stand at the isthmus gained traction among the southern states, a defensive crouch that felt safer than venturing north. Leonidas understood the fear, but he also saw its fatal flaw. Abandoning northern Greece meant abandoning Athens, Thebes, Plataea. vital allies whose contributions, especially the Athenian fleet Themistocles was building, were crucial. It meant surrendering vast resources and morale without a fight. He needed a symbol, a gesture of unbreakable resolve that would rally the hesitant. He needed to commit Sparta, visibly and irrevocably, to the defense of all Greece, not just the Peloponnese. A pivotal moment came with the arrival of the oracle from Delphi. The Pythia's words, delivered by trembling priests, were apocalyptic and ambiguous, chilling the blood of even the sternest Spartans. Hear your fate, O dwellers in Sparta of the wide spaces. Either your famed great town must be sacked by Perseus's sons, or, if that be not, the whole land of Lacedaemon shall mourn the death of a king of the house of Heracles. For not the strength of lions or of bulls shall hold him, strength against strength, for he has the power of Zeus, and will not be checked till one of these two he has consumed. A murmur of dread ran through the elders. The prophecy seemed to offer only doom, the sack of Sparta or the death of a Heraclid king. Despair threatened to take root. Leonidas listened, his face impassive. He saw the fear in the eyes of the Gerousia, the hesitation in the ephors. Then he stood. The room fell silent.
He walked slowly to the center, the bronze diadem cool on his brow. Elders of Sparta! His voice was calm, cutting through the tension. The oracle speaks of sacrifice. It speaks of a king's death. It does not speak of Sparta's defeat. He paused, letting his words sink in. The Perseid is Xerxes, son of Darius. The prophecy offers a choice: our city sacked, or a king dies defending it. Is there a Spartan king who would hesitate to choose the latter? Is there a Spartan who would not see the honor in such a fate? He looked around the room, meeting each pair of eyes. The lion's strength, that is the phalanx. The bull's strength, that is the Persian horde. They meet strength against strength. And the king who falls, let him fall knowing he held the power of Zeus, the spirit of freedom within him. Let his death be the shield that saves Sparta. Let his sacrifice fulfill the prophecy and break the Persians' will. His words transformed the despair. The prophecy wasn't just doom, it was a call to heroic sacrifice. It offered a path, however grim, to salvation. The death of a king became not a tragedy to avoid, but a necessary offering, a guarantee of ultimate victory. The mood shifted from dread to a somber, resolute acceptance. Leonidas had reframed the oracle's terror into a Spartan imperative. His path was now clear, ordained by both strategy and fate. He would lead a force north to Thermopylae, but Spartan law, tied to the sacred Carnean festival and the Olympian Games, forbade a full army march during these holy months. Leonidas couldn't take the entire Spartan host. He proposed a solution. He would go north immediately with his personal bodyguard, the Hippias, 300 of Sparta's finest chosen men, all fathers of living sons, ensuring their lineage continued. They would be the vanguard, the symbol. They would hold the pass long enough for the festivals to end and the main army to mobilize. They would be the anvil upon which the Persian hammer would break, buying precious time. Selecting the 300 was a sacred duty. Leonidas chose not just for strength, but for unwavering loyalty, deep understanding of Spartan duty, and the resilience to face certain hardship and probable death. Veterans like Leonidas, known for his dry wit and unshakable nerve. Alpheus, his brother-in-arms since the agoge. Young, fiercely committed warriors like Aristodemus and Pontites. Each man chosen knew the odds. Each understood they were walking into a furnace.
The night before departure, the mood in Sparta was electric, a potent mix of dread, pride, and solemnity. Leonidas stood before the 300 assembled in the agora, bathed in torchlight. They were a terrifying sight. Bronzed muscle honed by decades of training, faces set like stone beneath their crested helmets, red cloaks draped over shoulders that bore the weight of Sparta's hope. "Spartans!" Leonidas's voice cut through the night air. "You know why we march. You know the enemy, a host so vast they drink rivers dry and blot out the sun with their arrows. You know the place, a narrow pass where their numbers will choke. You know the law that binds our main army, and you know the oracle's word." He paused, his gaze sweeping over them. "We go not for glory, though glory may find us. We go not for conquest, for we defend. We go to delay, to bleed the giant, to show all Hellas that Sparta does not flinch, that freedom has a price, and we Spartans are ready to pay it." He raised his spear. "They come with whips and chains, thinking to make slaves of free men. They come with fire, thinking to burn the spirit of Greece. We stand with spear and shield. We stand with the courage of our fathers. We stand at Thermopylae. Let the hot gates live up to their name. Let the ground run hot with Persian blood. For Sparta, for freedom, Elelou!" The answering roar from the 300 shook the very foundations of the city. "Elelou!" It was a sound of defiance, a promise of death, a lion's challenge hurled at the approaching storm. Leonidas lowered his spear. He sought Gorgo's face in the crowd. She stood tall, her expression unreadable, but her eyes held his with an intensity that spoke volumes. No tears, only the fierce pride and unbearable weight of a Spartan queen sending her king to die. He gave her a single, almost imperceptible nod. Then he turned, his crimson cloak swirling, and led the 300 out of Sparta, not towards the rising sun, but into the gathering darkness of the north, towards the narrow pass where history and destiny awaited. The storm was coming, and Leonidas walked deliberately, steadfastly, into its teeth.
Chapter 5. The Hot Gates, Thermopylae, August 480 BCE. Part 1. The Anvil Takes Shape. The march north was swift and disciplined, a crimson serpent winding through the dusty valleys of central Greece. Leonidas pushed his 300 hard, covering ground with the relentless pace ingrained in them since the Dromos. They were joined by contingents from other states who answered the call to defend the pass. 700 Thespians, whose city lay directly in the Persian path, burning with fierce patriotism. 400 Thebans, though their loyalty was suspect, sent more by oligarchic fear of Persia than democratic fervor. 1,000 Phocians, locals who knew the treacherous mountain paths, and smaller groups from Opuntian Locris, Mycenae, and other towns, perhaps 7,000 in total, a paltry force against the approaching tide. The sight of the Spartans, however, acted as a powerful talisman, stiffening the resolve of the allied hoplites. They reached Thermopylae in the sweltering heat of late summer. Leonidas surveyed the pass with a soldier's critical eye. It was perfect for defense, exactly as described. A narrow strip of land, barely the width of a wagon track in places, squeezed between the sheer, forested cliffs of Mount Kallidromos and the treacherous marshes and waters of the Malian Gulf. To the east, the pass widened slightly before opening into the plains of Melis. To the west, it narrowed again. The Parians would have to come through this deadly funnel. The Phocians pointed out an old, overgrown goat path, the Anopaia, winding high up the slopes of Kallidromos, potentially allowing an enemy to outflank the position. Leonidas immediately assigned the 1,000 Phocians to guard it.
"Hold that path," he commanded their leader. "The safety of Greece rests on your vigilance." He set his men to work reinforcing the ancient Phocian wall that partially blocked the pass. They labored under the fierce sun, piling stones, shoring up crumbling sections, transforming it into a formidable breastwork. Spartans didn't build empires, they built killing grounds. Leonidas positioned his main force just west of the wall, where the pass was narrowest. The Spartans, as the elite corps, would hold the center. The Thespians and others anchored the flanks. Sentries were posted day and night, scanning the eastern horizon.
Part 2. The ocean approaches. Then they came. First, scouts reported dust clouds visible for miles, a brown stain on the horizon. Then the earth began to vibrate. A low, constant thrum felt through the soles of their sandals. Finally, cresting the low hills to the east, the vanguard of the Persian army appeared. It was a sight to freeze the blood. A seemingly endless column of men, a kaleidoscope of ethnicities and armaments. Medes in colorful tunics and fish-scale armor. Saka with wicked axes. Ethiopians towering and dark-skinned. Bactrians on nimble horses. Egyptians with long spears. Lydians with crescent shields. It flowed like a human river, filling the plain from the foothills to the sea, its numbers dwarfing the tiny Greek force huddled at the pass. The glitter of spear points and helmets stretched to the horizon. The sheer scale was overwhelming, a physical manifestation of imperial power. Xerxes himself arrived, borne on a magnificent chariot, surrounded by his famed immortals, 10,000 elite infantry, their robes gleaming, their spears tipped with silver and gold. He established his command tent on a hill overlooking the pass, confident of an easy victory. He sent a mounted scout forward to assess the Greek defenses. The scout reported back, bewildered. The Spartans were outside the wall, some exercising, others calmly combing their long hair, a ritual preparation for battle. Xerxes laughed, incredulous. He sent a herald demanding the Greeks surrender their weapons. Leonidas's reply, echoing his defiance in Sparta, became legendary. Molon labe, come and take them. Part 3. The first waves break. Xerxes, expecting the Greeks to flee at the sight of his army, was enraged by the defiance. He ordered an immediate assault. The Medes and Kissians, fierce warriors, but lightly armored compared to hoplites, were sent forward first. They advanced into the narrow pass, their numbers useless in the confined space. The Greeks waited, shields locked, spears leveled, a bronze and wood wall. Leonidas stood in the front rank, his presence radiating calm authority. The Medes charged with wild cries that crashed against the Spartan line like a wave against a cliff. The result was slaughter. The long Greek spears, projecting over the interlocked shields, punched through Persian wicker shields and linen armor with ease. The hoplites, fighting in deep, rotating ranks, pushed forward with relentless, synchronized pressure. Men fell screaming, trampled underfoot. The narrow pass became a charnel house, choked with Persian dead. The Medes broke and fled in disarray, leaving heaps of bodies piled before the Greek line. Xerxes, watching from his throne, reportedly leaped up in fury and disbelief. He sent in his elite Kissians. They met the same fate, shattered, broken, driven back by the immovable bronze wall.
Part 4. The Immortals Fall. Humiliated and furious, Xerxes committed his best, the Immortals. These were Persia's finest, veterans of countless campaigns, their name derived from the fact their number was always maintained at exactly 10,000. Surely they would break these insolent Greeks. The Immortals advanced with disciplined precision, their colorful robes a stark contrast to the grim bronze of the Spartans. They were better equipped, better disciplined than the previous waves. The clash was titanic, the air filled with the deafening crash of bronze on bronze, the screams of the wounded, the guttural shouts of warriors. The Spartans fought with superhuman ferocity and skill.
Leonidas was everywhere in the front line, his spear a darting tongue of death, his shield a bulwark. Alpheus fought beside him, Dieneces on the other side. The dry wit of the veteran Spartans became legendary even in the heat of battle. When told the Persian arrows would blot out the sun, Dieneces reportedly quipped, "Good, then we shall fight in the shade." The immortals pressed hard. Their discipline matched the Spartans, but their shorter spears and lighter armor put them at a fatal disadvantage in the close confines of the phalanx battle. They couldn't penetrate the hedge of spear points. They couldn't break the shield wall. The Spartans and their allies, rotating ranks seamlessly, fought with the endurance of men possessed. The narrow pass negated Persian numbers. Only so many could engage at once, and against the hoplite wall they died. After hours of brutal, grinding combat, the immortals too were forced to retreat, broken and bloodied, their invincible reputation shattered on the anvil of Thermopylae. Xerxes, it is said, leapt from his throne 3 times in terror and rage at the sight. Part 5. The Traitor's Path. 2 days. 2 days of relentless Persian assaults broken against the unyielding Greek shield wall. Mountains of Persian dead choked the pass. Morale among the invaders plummeted. Xerxes was at a loss. His mighty army was impotent against this tiny, defiant force. Then fate, in the form of human greed, intervened. A Malian Greek traitor named Ephialtes, seeking Persian gold, crept into Xerxes' camp. He revealed the secret of the Oenopiya path. Hope surged through the Persian Pim. He immediately dispatched Hydarnes, commander of the Immortals, with a strong force under cover of darkness. Guided by Ephialtes, they began the treacherous ascent of Mount Kallidromos, aiming to descend behind the Greeks and trap them. Dawn on the 3rd day broke with ominous stillness. Leonidas received reports from Phocian scouts. The Oenopiya path had been forced. Hydarnes and the Immortals were descending behind them. The trap was about to snap shut. Leonidas called a swift council of war. The situation was desperate. They were surrounded. Retreat was still possible for some, but only if they moved immediately. Leonidas made his decision. The oracle's prophecy must be fulfilled. The sacrifice must be made to buy time. He ordered the bulk of the allied force, the Thebans, whose loyalty he distrusted, the Thespians and others, to withdraw south immediately while the pass was still partially open. He would stay with his Spartans and a corps of volunteers to cover their retreat and make the final stand. It was a death sentence, accepted without hesitation. The Thespians, however, refused. Their leader declared, "We came here to fight for Greece. We stay." The 700 Thespians chose to die with the Spartans. A handful of Thebans, shamed or inspired, also remained, though the bulk of their contingent departed. The stage was set for the final act. Leonidas, surrounded now by his 300 Spartans, the 700 Thespians, and perhaps 400 Thebans and Helots who chose to stay, prepared to meet the end. The hot gates were about to earn their name once more in the blood of heroes.
Chapter 6. The Last Stand. Thermopylae, August 480 BCE, Day 3. The air hung heavy with the stench of death. Days of accumulated blood, awful, and the sour tang of fear emanating from the Persian host massed just beyond the Phocian wall. For Leonidas and his remaining men, perhaps 1,400 hoplites and their attendant helots, the dawn brought not dread, but a grim, liberating clarity. The trap was sprung. The path of retreat was closing fast as Hydarnes' Immortals descended the slopes of Kallidromos to their rear. There was only one path left, forward into the teeth of the enemy, to die well and buy precious minutes for the retreating allies.
Leonidas stood before his Spartans and the loyal Thespians. The usual Spartan reserve was gone, replaced by a fierce, almost joyful anticipation. They had defied the greatest empire on earth for 2 days. They had shattered its best troops. Now they would fulfill their king's destiny and their own. He looked at them, Alpheus, his face etched with lines of fatigue but eyes bright. Dienekes, offering a grim, familiar smirk. The young warriors, no longer boys, but men facing immortality. The Thespians stood shoulder to shoulder with them, silent, resolute. "Spartans, Thespians, brothers!" Leonidas's voice, though hoarse from dust and shouting, carried clearly in the sudden quiet. "The path behind us is closed. The path before us is open, to glory. The oracle's word will be fulfilled this day. We die, but Sparta lives. Greece lives. Let our final act be one they will sing of for 1,000 years. No more waiting behind the wall. Today we take the fight to them, for our homes, for our freedom. Elelu!" A roar erupted, primal and defiant, echoing off the cliffs. Elelu! It was the sound of men embracing their fate. They smashed down a section of the Phocian wall they had so painstakingly rebuilt. Leonidas, at the very tip of the spear, raised his own spear and shield. "With me, advance!"
Part 1. The Charge into Darkness. They erupted from the past like avenging furies. The sight of the Greeks, vastly outnumbered and surrounded, charging the Persian horde, sent a shockwave through Xerxes' army. The Spartans and Thespians, shields locked in a compact lethal wedge, slammed into the stunned Persian front ranks with terrifying force. The impact was like a battering ram hitting a rotten door. Men were hurled backwards, spears snapped, shields shattered. Leonidas was a whirlwind of destruction in the center, his spear finding throats and eyes with literal precision, his shield boss crushing bone. Alpheus fought beside him, a relentless engine of death. The sheer suicidal ferocity of the charge drove the Persians back in confusion for precious yards. But the ocean was too vast. The initial shock wore off. Persian officers screamed orders. Archers, held back during the phalanx battles for fear of hitting their own, now unleashed a storm of arrows. They darkened the sky, a deadly hail that clattered off bronze helmets and shields, but found gaps in armor, thudded into unprotected limbs, struck down men in the rear ranks. The hoplites pressed on, ignoring the missiles, focused only on killing and driving forward. They carved a bloody path deeper into the Persian mass, aiming, perhaps, for the command tents visible in the distance, a final desperate lunge at Xerxes himself.
Part 2. The Fall of the Lion. The fighting became a chaotic, brutal melee. The tight phalanx formation dissolved under the sheer press of bodies and the uneven ground. It became a series of individual and small group fights. Leonidas fought like a man possessed, but even the Lion of Sparta could not hold back the tide forever. A spear thrust glanced off his breastplate, staggering him. An arrow grazed his thigh. He fought on, roaring, his bodyguard closing ranks around him, dying one by one. Then it happened. In the swirling dust and confusion, a Persian arrow found its mark. It struck Leonidas high on his left side, near the shoulder, punching through the bronze scales. He grunted, stumbling. Another arrow struck his leg. He went down to one knee, his shield sagging. Instantly, a wave of Persians surged forward, sensing the kill. Alpheus, seeing his king fall, roared a denial and threw himself into the breach, cutting down 2 attackers before being overwhelmed by a forest of spears. Dienekes fought like a cornered wolf nearby, surrounded, refusing to yield. Leonidas struggled to rise, blood soaking his tunic, his vision blurring. He saw the Persian soldiers closing in, their faces a mix of fear and triumph. He raised his spear one last time in a final, defiant gesture. Then a flurry of blows rained down, spears, swords, axes. The king of Sparta, Leonidas, son of Anaxandridas, died on the blood-soaked earth of Thermopylae, surrounded by the bodies of his enemies and his loyal guard. Part 3. The Body and the Banner. The death of the king did not break the Spartans, it ignited them. Seeing Leonidas fall, a cry of rage and grief went up that chilled the Persians. The remaining Spartans fought with berserk fury, forming a shrinking circle of death around their fallen king. They fought not to win, but to protect his body and to sell their lives as dearly as possible. Spears snapped, swords shattered, shields splintered. They fought with fists, teeth, rocks. They died where they stood, each man taking multiple Persians with him. The Thespians fought with equal valor, their own sacrifice often overshadowed, but no less heroic. They died beside their Spartan allies, refusing to yield an inch. The ground around Leonidas's body became a mound of corpses, Greek and Persian intertwined. Eventually, inevitably, the last defenders were overwhelmed. The final Spartans and Thespians were cut down in a final, brutal flurry. Xerxes, witnessing the fall of the man who had humbled his army for 3 days, ordered his body retrieved. The Spartans had fought so desperately to protect it that the Persians suffered heavy casualties even after the fighting had ceased elsewhere. When they finally reached Leonidas, his body was surrounded by a wall of the Persian dead. Xerxes, in a fit of rage and perhaps superstitious fear, ordered a final desecration. He had Leonidas's head struck from his body and mounted on a pike. The headless body was crucified. It was a barbaric act, meant to humiliate and terrify. But for the Greeks who heard of it, it only deepened the legend. The Spartans had not been broken. They had been martyred.
Part 4. The Price and the Prize. The Battle of Thermopylae was over. Xerxes had forced the pass, but at a horrific cost. Ancient sources claim 20,000 Persians died, including 2 of Xerxes' own brothers. The flower of the Spartan army, 298 of the 300, 2 had been sent away as messengers before the final stand, lay dead, alongside the 700 Thespians and the others who chose to stay. The hot gates were choked with the dead, a testament to the power of disciplined courage against overwhelming odds. But Leonidas's sacrifice achieved its strategic purpose. The delaying action had bought crucial time. The Greek fleet, forewarned by the stand, withdrew from Artemisium south to Salamis, where Themistocles would soon engineer a decisive naval victory. The Peloponnesian allies used the time to strengthen the fortifications at the Isthmus. Most importantly, Thermopylae became a beacon. News of the Spartan stand, their defiance, and their king's heroic death spread like wildfire through Greece. It shattered the myth of Persian invincibility. It ignited a fire of resistance. It showed that freedom could be defended, that courage could defy tyranny, even in the face of certain death. The Persian army marched on, capturing Athens, but the spirit of Thermopylae marched with the Greeks. Leonidas had fallen, but the lion's roar echoed across Hellas, summoning its people to fight on. The price was annihilation. The prize was the salvation of a spirit, the spirit that would ultimately triumph at Plataea and Mycale. The gates had fallen, but the path to victory had been forged in the blood of the 300 and their king.
Chapter 7. Echoes of Defiance. Greece, 480 to 479 BCE. The news of Thermopylae reached Sparta like a physical blow, yet also a strange, fierce tonic. The city was draped in the somber purple of mourning. Wives who had bid their husbands farewell with the chilling words, "Come back with your shield or on it," now received confirmation of the latter. Gorgo, the queen, stood tall and dry-eyed amidst the grief, her own sorrow a private fortress. The loss was catastrophic, nearly an entire generation of elite Spartiates gone. Yet the manner of their death, the sheer scale of the Persian losses they inflicted, and the fulfillment of the Delphic oracle transformed tragedy into transcendent sacrifice. Messengers brought details, fragmented, horrific, glorious. They spoke of the 3 days of slaughter, of the immortals broken, of the final charge, of Leonidas's fall defending his men, of the desperate struggle over his body, and finally, of the desecration. Xerxes' act of beheading and crucifying the Spartan king ignited not terror, but white-hot fury and an unquenchable thirst for vengeance throughout the Peloponnese. The legend crystallized instantly. Leonidas and the 300 had not been defeated. They had chosen death over surrender, buying Greece's life with their own. Their stand was a sacred covenant fulfilled. The strategic impact was immediate. The Persian juggernaut, though slowed and bloodied, rolled south. Athens was evacuated. The Acropolis burned. Panic threatened to shatter the fragile Greek alliance. Southern states clamored to retreat behind the Isthmus wall. It was then that the spirit of Thermopylae proved its worth. Themistocles, the Athenian strategos, used the example fiercely. "Remember the hot gates," he thundered at the war council on Salamis. "Remember Leonidas. Will we hide behind walls while the Persians burn all Greece? Or will we fight, as the Spartans fought, and win?" The memory of the 300 became the glue that held the alliance together. When the Persian fleet entered the narrow straits of Salamis, the Greek ships, outnumbered but fighting with the desperate courage of men inspired by Thermopylae, achieved a stunning victory. Xerxes, watching his navy shattered from the shore, fled back to Asia Minor, leaving his general Mardonius with a large land army to finish the conquest. Winter provided a respite. In Sparta, under the shadow of immense loss, the business of war continued. Pleistarchus, Leonidas's young nephew, was formally recognized as king, with Pausanias, son of Cleombrotus, Leonidas's brother and regent, acting as his guardian and effective commander. The Spartans, though mourning, were now driven by a sacred duty to avenge Leonidas and the fallen 300. The sacrifice demanded repayment in Persian blood, as it drank ours at the hot gates. Come spring 479 BCE, the decisive campaign began. Mardonius occupied Boeotia, inviting the Greeks to fight on the plains near Plataea, terrain favorable to his cavalry. The Greek army, led by Pausanias, advanced cautiously. The Spartans, forming the core of the hoplite force, marched under the shadow of Leonidas's legacy. They carried not just their spears, but the weight of an unfulfilled oath of vengeance. Before the battle, Pausanias reportedly invoked the fallen king. "Today we fight not just for Greece, but for Leonidas. Let every Spartan strike a blow for his honor. Let the earth drink Persian blood as it drank ours at the hot gates." The Battle of Plataea was a brutal, sprawling affair. Initial setbacks threatened the Greek lines, but when the critical moment came, it was the Spartan phalanx, fighting with the ferocity of men possessed by the ghosts of Thermopylae, that delivered the crushing blow. They shattered the elite Persian troops and immortals guarding Mardonius. The Persian general himself was killed, his army routed and slaughtered. Simultaneously, the Greek fleet destroyed the remnants of the Persian navy at Mycale on the coast of Asia Minor. The twin victories of Plataea and Mycale broke Persian power in Greece forever. The invasion was over. the impossible had happened. The tiny, fractious Greek city-states had defeated the colossal Persian Empire. And at the heart of that victory, fueling the courage that turned the tide, was the echo of defiance from Mahat gates. Leonidas's sacrifice had not been in vain. It had bought time, inspired unity, forged an unbreakable spirit, and ultimately paved the path to liberation. The lion's roar, silenced at Thermopylae, had resonated across Greece, summoning a victory that secured the future of the Western world. The debt to the fallen was paid in full, in the coin of Persian defeat and Greek freedom. The echo of defiance had become the trumpet of triumph.
Chapter 8, The Immortal Shadow. Sparta and Greece, post-479 BCE. The triumphant Greek armies returned from Plataea and Mycale, bearing spoils and glory, but Sparta received its heroes under a pall of profound, complex grief. The victory was undeniable, the Persian menace shattered, but the cost at Thermopylae remained a gaping wound in the heart of Lacedaemon. The city streets felt emptier, the Syssitia quieter. Nearly 300 hearths burned without their master. Nearly 300 sons grew up knowing their fathers were legends carved in stone, not flesh. Gorgo, the queen mother, remained a pillar of Spartan resolve, her grief a private matter, her public presence a reminder of the sacrifice demanded by the state. Young King Pleistarchus grew up in the immense shadow of his uncle, the martyred king. Leonidas's body, or rather his remains, were finally recovered. Decades after the battle, during a truce, Spartan envoys traveled to Thermopylae. They found the battlefield still littered with bones bleached by the sun. Identifying specific remains was impossible, but the Spartans gathered what they believed to be the bones of their king and the 298 Spartiates who fell with him. They were brought home with immense solemnity. A hero's tomb was erected for Leonidas within Sparta. It wasn't a grand mausoleum by Athenian standards, but for Sparta it was significant. A marked grave for an individual, a rare honor breaking their usual practice of anonymous burials. It symbolized the unique nature of his sacrifice. His name was inscribed, alongside a simple, powerful epitaph composed by the poet Simonides, whose words would resonate for millennia. Go, stranger, and to Lacedaemon tell, that here, obedient to her laws, we fell.
These lines captured the essence of the Spartan sacrifice, not personal glory, but unwavering obedience to the laws and needs of the state. Leonidas became the ultimate embodiment of the Spartan ideal, the king who died as the first soldier of Sparta. His influence permeated Spartan life and thought. The story of Thermopylae became the central pillar of Spartan identity, recounted to every boy in the agoge, a sacred text of courage and sacrifice. The stand was dissected, not for tactics, but for its moral lessons. The power of discipline, the supremacy of the group over the individual, the beauty of a noble death in defense of home. Leonidas became more than a historical figure. He became an archetype, the perfect Spartan king, the man who fulfilled his duty absolutely. Beyond Sparta, Leonidas's fame grew exponentially. Throughout Greece, he was hailed as the savior whose sacrifice made Salamis and Plataea possible. Thebes, which had Medized, sided with Persia, was treated with contempt, its name forever stained, while Sparta, thanks to Thermopylae, gained immense moral authority and prestige, becoming the undisputed leader of Greece for decades. The tale of the 300 spread like wildfire, told and retold by poets, playwrights, and historians. Herodotus, writing his histories a generation later, immortalized the stand in vivid detail, ensuring its place in the historical canon. Leonidas became a pan-Hellenic hero, a symbol of resistance against tyranny for all Greeks. However, the shadow also held complexities. The very nature of the sacrifice, a chosen annihilation, became a point of fascination and sometimes critique. Some philosophers questioned the wisdom of such absolute sacrifice. Others, particularly Athenians who championed naval power and democratic ideals, subtly downplayed the Spartan contribution relative to their own at Salamis. But even critics couldn't deny the raw power of the story, the sheer, awe-inspiring courage it represented. Within Sparta itself, the legacy was a double-edged sword. While it cemented Spartan values, it also became a weighty burden. Future Spartan kings and generals were measured against the impossible standard of Leonidas. The expectation of self-sacrifice became almost paralyzing. The state's rigid conservatism, partly justified by the success of the Thermopylae model, became increasingly out of step with a changing Greece. The immense loss of manpower at Thermopylae also weakened Sparta demographically, a slow bleed that contributed to its long-term decline. Yet, the core legend remained untarnished. Leonidas transcended his city. He became a universal symbol. The image of the defiant king standing against impossible odds, choosing death with honor over life with submission, resonated across cultures and centuries. He represented the power of the human spirit to defy tyranny through courage and sacrifice. The tomb in Sparta held bones, but the true monument to Leonidas was the immortal story, a story that whispered to every generation facing oppression, resistance is possible, honor is eternal. Some stands, even in defeat, echo forever as victories of the spirit. The lion was dead, but his shadow stretched long and indomitable across the pages of history.
Chapter 9. The Marble and the Myth. Across time, 4th century BCE onwards. The physical tomb of Leonidas in Sparta became a site of pilgrimage and reverence. Spartans visited it to honor their greatest king, to reaffirm their commitment to the laws for which he died. Young warriors undergoing the agoge were brought before it, the austere stone a silent, powerful instructor in duty and sacrifice. Foreign dignitaries and travelers sought it out, drawn by the legend, standing in hushed awe before the resting place of the man who defied an empire. But Leonidas truly lived on in the realm of story and symbol. Greek orators and writers constantly invoked him. Isocrates praised him as the embodiment of Hellenic virtue. Plato, while critical of some Spartan practices, acknowledged the sublimity of his sacrifice. Alexander the Great, marching east to conquer the Persian Empire that Leonidas had defied, reportedly paid homage at Thermopylae itself. He saw in Leonidas a kindred spirit of martial ambition and defiance, a precursor to his own world-shaking campaign. He vowed to avenge the desecration of the Spartan king by defeating the Persians utterly, a promise he spectacularly fulfilled. As centuries turned, the Roman Empire absorbed Greece. The pragmatic Romans admired martial virtue above all else. Leonidas, the ultimate soldier king, resonated deeply. Historians like Plutarch enshrined him in their biographies, adding layers of anecdote and moralizing to Herodotus's foundation. Plutarch's account of Gorgo's wisdom, "Come back with your shield," Dionysius's quip about fighting in the shade, and the traitor Ephialtes became inseparable parts of the legend. Thermopylae was taught as an exemplar of republican virtue and resistance to tyranny, values Rome claimed to uphold. Statues of Leonidas and memorials to the 300 appeared in Roman forums,
symbols of courage to inspire legions. The rise of Christianity shifted the focus from martial heroism to spiritual martyrdom, yet Leonidas endured. Early church fathers sometimes struggled with pagan heroes, but the sheer moral weight of self-sacrifice for a cause resonated with Christian ideals of martyrdom. Leonidas was seen less as a pagan king and more as a timeless exemplar of courage and fidelity to principle. The Byzantine Empire, heir to Rome and Greece, kept the flame alive. Leonidas featured in chronicles and moral treatises, a classical hero integrated into the Christian worldview. Manuscripts preserved the works of Herodotus and Plutarch, ensuring the story's survival through the Middle Ages. The Renaissance rediscovered classical antiquity with fervor. Greek texts flooded into Western Europe. Leonidas and Thermopylae became potent symbols for Renaissance thinkers and artists grappling with themes of civic virtue, republicanism, and resistance against oppression, whether political or religious. Paintings depicted the heroic last stand. Plays dramatized the sacrifice. He became an icon of the emerging humanist ideal, the individual confronting fate with courage.
The Enlightenment further amplified his symbolic power. Philosophers like Rousseau and Voltaire saw in Thermopylae a powerful metaphor for the struggle of reason and liberty against despotism and superstition. The stand represented the triumph of free will and civic duty over blind obedience to tyranny. David's famous neoclassical painting, Leonidas at Thermopylae, completed 1814, though idealized, captured this spirit perfectly, depicting the king as a noble, resolute figure, calmly preparing for death amidst his men, an image seared into the Western consciousness. The American and French revolutions drew heavily on classical republican imagery. Patriots invoked Leonidas as a symbol of resistance against imperial power, Britain, or monarchical tyranny, Bourbon France. Molon Labe became a defiant slogan for freedom fighters. Thermopylae was cited as an inspiration for last stands and sacrifices in the name of liberty. The 19th and 20th centuries saw the legend weaponized and reinterpreted. Nationalist movements across Europe adopted Leonidas as a symbol of ethnic pride and martial spirit, sometimes distorting his message into one of aggressive militarism. He was invoked by both sides in conflicts, a testament to the power and potential malleability of his myth. Yet the core image, the defiant stand against overwhelming odds for a noble cause, retained its power, inspiring resistance against fascism and totalitarianism during the World Wars and beyond. Archaeology added tangible layers. Excavations at Thermopylae in the 19th and 20th centuries, while not finding dramatic treasures, confirmed the topography of the battle, making the heroism seem even more astounding against the reality of the narrow pass. The discovery of the Serpent Column at Delphi, listing the Greek cities that fought the Persians, with Sparta prominently named, provided a physical link to the era. Leonidas became ingrained in popular culture. Poems like Cavafy's Thermopylae, novels, films, most famously 300, and even video games retold the story, each era refracting the legend through its own lens. While historical accuracy often took a back seat to drama or ideology, the central awe-inspiring fact remained. A small band chose to die for a principle against impossible odds. The marble tomb in Sparta might be simple, but the myth of Leonidas, endlessly reshaped and retold, proved truly immortal.
Chapter 10. The Eternal Flame. Legacy. Present Day. The narrow pass of Thermopylae looks vastly different today. Centuries of silt deposition from the Spercheius River have pushed the coastline miles seaward, transforming the ancient battlefield into fertile farmland.
The hot gates are now a quiet, sun-baked plain, marked by a low hillock known as Kolonos, where the final stand is believed to have occurred. A modern highway slices through the landscape where Persians and Greeks once clashed. Yet the spirit of the place remains potent. Atop Kolonos stands the most poignant monument, a simple, powerful statue of King Leonidas. He is depicted not in the throes of battle, but standing resolute, shield by his side, spear grounded, gazing north towards the path of the invading army. His expression is calm, determined, accepting. Nearby, a stone plaque bears Simonides' immortal epitaph, "Go, stranger, and tell the Spartans." Modern memorials honor the Thespians and the other Greeks who fought and died alongside the 300, finally giving them their due place in the story. Pilgrims still come, not just historians or Greeks, but people from all over the world. They stand before the Leonidas monument, tracing the letters of the epitaph, gazing out over the peaceful fields that were once a choke point of history. They feel the weight of the sacrifice, the sheer audacity of the stand. Tour buses rumble by, but moments of quiet contemplation still descend upon the site, a palpable sense of reverence for the courage enacted there millennia ago. Leonidas's legacy extends far beyond this patch of ground or the borders of Greece. He remains one of history's most potent symbols. What does he represent in the 21st century? Ultimate defiance. Leonidas is the archetype of resistance against overwhelming force, whether that force is military, political, social, or even internal doubt. He embodies the refusal to submit, even when victory seems impossible. His cry, "Molon labe," resonates with anyone facing oppression or injustice, a timeless declaration of the human spirit's refusal to be disarmed. Sacrifice for principle. His choice to stay and die, knowing it was strategically necessary for a greater cause, elevates duty and principle above personal survival. In an age often characterized by self-interest, Leonidas stands as a stark reminder of the power and nobility of sacrificing for something larger than oneself, be it freedom, community, or an ideal. Leadership and resolve. He exemplifies decisive leadership in crisis. His clarity of purpose, his ability to inspire absolute loyalty, and his calm acceptance of fate in the face of annihilation remain powerful lessons in leadership under extreme pressure. The cost of freedom. Thermopylae is a stark, brutal reminder that freedom is never free. It is often purchased with the dearest currency, blood and life. Leonidas forces us to confront the terrible cost sometimes demanded to defend what we hold dear. Enduring inspiration. Across cultures, ideologies, and centuries, the story continues to inspire. Athletes push through pain, invoking his spirit. Activists facing down tyranny draw strength from his defiance. Ordinary people confronting personal battles find courage in his example. He is a universal symbol of human resilience and courage. The historical Leonidas was a product of a harsh, militaristic society whose values are often alien or even repellent to modern sensibilities. Sparta was a slave state, its culture rigid and oppressive. Yet the myth of Leonidas, distilled from the complex reality, transcends its origins. It speaks to something fundamental in the human condition, the capacity for extraordinary courage, the willingness to stand firm for what is right, and the understanding that some actions, even in defeat, achieve a victory that echoes through eternity. The flame lit at Thermopylae was not extinguished by Persian arrows. It was carried forward by the Greeks to victory at Salamis and Plataea.
It was kept alive by historians, poets, artists, and revolutionaries. It burns today not just in the monuments at the pass or in Sparta, but in the collective memory of humanity. Leonidas, the Lion King, is no longer just a Spartan monarch. He is an eternal flame, a beacon reminding us that in the darkest hours, courage can defy the odds, sacrifice can purchase hope, and the echo of defiance can shape the destiny of the world. The hot gates may be silted over, but the path of Leonidas, the path of unwavering courage in the face of the abyss, remains forever open, forever challenging, forever inspiring. The lion sleeps, but his roar still echoes.